My name is Alastair Woods, and I'm the Ontario Chairperson of the Canadian Federation of Students, representing more than 300,000 college and university students here in the province from Thunder Bay to Windsor. As mentioned, I'm 7 days into my term, and so to sit on a panel like this one is both exhilarating and absolutely terrifying. So please forgive me if I stumble a little bit. I've never been accused of being shy, but I am a little bit now with this new profile. I wanted to actually start off my remarks with a bit of a joke. It was mentioned that I was actually graduating soon from York University with International Development Studies and Political Science degree, and I was going to say, well, hopefully after I make my remarks, I can still expect my name to be called at convocation on Tuesday. But then I started to think, after 5 years as a campus activist, they probably can't wait to get rid of me fast enough. And so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of smiles as I approach the stage, not all in good faith. So I wanted to break my remarks into three sections. So first of all, I'd like to address the upfront costs of post-secondary education, because I think too often politicians and administrators, they like to artificially separate quality from tuition fees as if there is no link between the two. And I would actually like to push back against that a little bit. Second, I would like to speak on the encroachment of corporate interests on college and university campuses. And finally, I wanted to give a little bit of a state of the union, if you will, on Ontario's youth and students and where we can go moving forward together. So let's begin with the foundation of this issue: skyrocketing tuition fees caused by chronic underfunding of college and university education. Time and time again, research has proven that tuition fees are the single largest barrier to participation in higher education in this province. Yet government smoke and mirrors attempts to cover up this alarming fact. During my final year as the Vice President Campaigns and Advocacy of the York Federation of Students, Local 68 of the Canadian Federation of Students, I engaged in a very lengthy back and forth conversation with the former Minister of Training Colleges and Universities, Glenn Murray, over his proposals to innovate the sector. Minister Murray constantly implored us to set aside the discussion about tuition fees for a moment so that we could have a discussion about transforming college and university education. What that transformation was still today remains a mystery. But it became quite clear early on that those discussions that the ministry wanted to have were not intended to create a world-class system of accessible, affordable, and public education. They were meant to do more with less. For example, proposals to shift classes online were actually touted by the minister as radical and revolutionary, as a new way to share and expand knowledge, as if high-quality education had never existed before the invention of the internet. I would say something far more radical and far more revolutionary is to abolish tuition fees, hire more teachers, and ensure students have the support they deserve. But on this issue of technology in the classroom, the Federation has been clear on this issue. In an era of iPads and smartphones, technology should be used to enhance the classroom experience, but never to replace it. As students who pay the highest tuition fees in the country, you might expect that the steep price alludes to some measure of quality above and beyond other colleges and universities, and assume that in somewhere like Newfoundland and Labrador, which this year has the lowest tuition fees in the country, we somehow get a better deal than they do. But in the bizarro world that is Ontario, that's actually not true. We have the fewest teachers per student, we have the largest class sizes, and the lowest per student funding in all of Canada. And so, essentially, the students of Ontario are being asked to pay the price of a Lexus for a 1995 used Dodge Neon, which was a car I had the displeasure of driving when my parents gave it to me. So there must be swift action from the government to immediately increase funding to colleges and universities so that we can hire more teachers and progressively reduce tuition fees. And I want to note something very important. Ontario and Canada is largely out of step with the rest of the industrialized world. Today, over 25 countries, both in the global north and south, have no tuition fees. And recently, Germany has abolished tuition fees a second time after a disastrous and failed experiment to introduce fees in the early 2000s. World-class education should never be linked to the perceived prestige of a sticker price. It should be linked to small classrooms with dedicated teachers who are adequately compensated for their work. Another consequence of chronic underfunding in this sector has resulted in an increasingly large amount of private money being funneled into college and university research and education. And corporate influence over public research and teaching has been expanding over the last 20 years, all at the expense of academic freedom and the public interest. And so I want to speak about this in two distinct forms. So the first is a direct attempt by private interests to direct research outcomes and curriculum, and second, as a very short-sighted public policy to avoid regulating and funding the college and university sector. So take, for example, the Munk School for Global Affairs at the University of Toronto. It was established on a $35 million donation from mining magnate Peter Munk, which I should add gives him a $16 million tax deduction, so it's really $19 million. But the donation is to be paid out over a number of years, subject to the Munk family's approval of the school, which must report to the board on the activities and curriculum of its programs. So, in short terms, all this says to me is that a mining giant who is accused of grave human rights abuses across the world gets to withhold money from the school should he deem the curriculum or research inappropriate. As an extra slap in the face, the original contract stipulated that commoners couldn't use the front door of the building and would have to enter through the side door. This is the direction of corporately funded research in Canada, and it's both offensive and alarming that our government not only allows it to happen, but openly facilitates it. And so this comes to my second point regarding corporate influence on education. As governments willfully neglect to adequately fund post-secondary education in this province, they're looking for ways to bridge the gap between revenue and operating costs. The first reaction is to allow tuition fees to rise and shift operating costs onto students and their families, and this is something they've been doing for decades. But the second way to do this is to solicit money from private donors. So institutions like the Ontario Research Commercialization Program and the Ontario Centres for Excellence exist for one purpose only, to match private sector money with college and university programs. The Colleges Ontario Network for Industry Innovation, which in 2009 received $10.3 million over 3 years from the Ministry of Research and Innovation, gives financial support to quote-unquote industry-driven applied research at public colleges. The testimonials on their website feature prominent corporate executives hailing the network's support to accelerate commercialization of their products, one of whom boasted that they looked forward to dramatically higher sales of their product in the coming year, much thanks to this network. But what's aptly left unmentioned in these testimonials is that the arrival of their products into the marketplace at lightning speed required very little private investment, if any at all, since the research was generally publicly funded, and with unpaid students and faculty members taking on these projects as part of classes and assignments. It's criminal. To take another example is to take this absurd idea of accelerator centers, previously known as incubators, learning hubs, innovation centers. You can make up whatever word you want. Maybe you can call them magic lands. The government has made these semi-autonomous, corporate-sponsored workspaces a priority in the upcoming budget and in their youth jobs strategy, to ensure that students at college and university receive more opportunity for hands-on work and to encourage what they deem as entrepreneurialism. But there's a fundamental problem with these spaces. They're not only designed to give students more experiential learning opportunities, but they subsidize for-profit research since students generally team up with private sector partners for funding, which in turn provides these partners with cheap, if not free labor and research, completely neutralizing the need for these corporate bodies to invest in their own jobs in research and development. And I find this rhetoric from the government of entrepreneurialism particularly offensive. To me, it says very little about the very real capabilities of students in this province to succeed, but everything about a government that is incapable and unwilling to invest in a real job strategy. Like the financial burden of education, finding a good job and starting one's life on stable footing is now a responsibility completely put on youth and students. Under the banner of entrepreneurialism, the government no longer has any culpability. Now it is, if you fail, then that's your own fault. Never mind the fact that starting a new business venture is financially untenable for most students who are struggling with mortgage-sized debts upon graduation. If this government was truly interested in nurturing entrepreneurialism in this province, they would remove financial barriers to college and university. They would hire more teachers to keep pace with demand and return our post-secondary institutions firmly into the realm of curiosity-driven research. Quality education and research will never come in the form of a signed check from Coca-Cola. But it will come from the opportunity to try, fail, and try again, without the fear of financial burden or penalty, and with the understanding that we will have the adequate support from knowledgeable faculty should you need it. So finally, I want to finish my remarks by painting a broader picture of a generation in crisis. As students struggle to make ends meet under the mounting pressures of tuition fees, living costs, and a sluggish job market, the government seems intent to continue to neglect its responsibilities to fund affordable and accessible post-secondary education. But quality is impacted when there's inadequate funding. Quality is impacted when corporate interests get to tell us what we can and cannot teach and learn and research. But most of all, quality is impacted when we refuse to acknowledge the tremendous and historically unique obstacles faced by students today. How can we possibly believe any student to succeed academically when they're focusing on how to pay their rent for the next month in every class? How can we ensure that students have ample opportunity to interact with the course material and curriculum when they finish their class only to rush off to one of their 2 part-time jobs? But most of all, what kind of quality education can we expect when the public dialogue about education classifies learning and knowledge as something that can be bought and sold? Under that assumption, quality is taken to mean the highest turnover for the lowest costs. But when education becomes a product, we sacrifice quality for the sake of expediency. We attack teachers, we neglect students, and hand over the direction of public education to the highest bidder. We must come together to form a common front to fight for high-quality, public, post-secondary education. There's been a lot of talk here this morning about who is going to stand up and take the risk and speak out. And I want to stand here representing 300,000 students to tell you that the Canadian Federation of Students Ontario is prepared and willing to stand up and take the risk to defend teachers everywhere in this province. And so, what do we mean when we say high-quality education? I've mentioned it before. In our humble opinion, a high-quality education is one in which there are no financial barriers to participation, where class sizes are reasonable and small, where full-time professors and instructors are given adequate compensation for their teaching and research, and where the core mandate of curiosity-driven programming and research is our guiding principle. It's obvious that today we're farther away from that ideal than we were perhaps 20 or 30 years ago, but I've never been known to give in to the "that's the way it is" mentality, and I don't believe anybody in this room does either. Just because things are one way today doesn't mean they will be that way tomorrow, or that they should be. And with time, effort, and solidarity, I'm positive that we can push back on this corporate agenda and put public education back in public hands. It took Germany less than 10 years to admit their mistake in reintroducing tuition fees. After 30 years of disastrous deregulation, fee hikes, funding cuts, and privatization, Ontario has woken up with one killer hangover, and I think it's about time we admitted our own grave mistake, start fresh, and fix the problem that we created. Thank you very much.